All right, we're ready. We're gonna start letting folks in here in the middle. Good evening, everyone. We are here with Glendalys Medina. I'm so excited to be virtually in Glendalys's studio tonight. It's a real treat for me. I had this fantastic piece that I'm babysitting right now over my shoulder, and Artfare has been working with Glendalys now for a year. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and Artfare booth down in Nada, Miami. Your work was very well received, and it comes without saying you come from a really fantastic previous experiences, whether showing at PAMM or the Museo del Barrio, the Bronx Museum of Art. You've been involved with EFA, you've won NIFA fellowships, you've really scored in relationship to some residencies like Yaddo. You've really been around the block, kid. I'm just so glad to be with you tonight. My name is Carolina Wheat. I'm an Artfare curator, and as we're still letting folks in here, I'm really happy to introduce Glendalys Medina. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you for everybody for coming. I usually start. So I'm gonna move around. So just be patient with me. I usually start talking about this piece. So this piece is called My Boombox, and my artwork has a lot to do with personal development and using personal development and hip hop culture together to talk about identity and talk about image and how you can redefine yourself. So when I was in graduate school, I wanted to become somebody else. And I have a really good friend called Aisha Tandiwe Bell, and she used to call herself Super Black Woman. And I was like, oh, I want to have an alternate persona, and I called it the Shank, but that alternate persona really became a process of working. And so the first thing I did was to make these objects that had to do with hip hop culture. So I made the boombox, and I made a couple of other pieces. But why I showed the boombox first is because the boombox really led me to a visual language in which I use today. So I wish I could zoom in, but I can't zoom in. But if you could see the face of the boombox, those shapes on the face of the boombox really led to this piece, which is called Exercise 1. And Exercise 1 is an instruction on how to create your own visual language. So it tells you to pick an object in which you identify with, break that down into 50 shapes, rearrange it, and then use that stencil and mirror that stencil. So this is my object. So I obviously picked the boombox. I broke it down to its basic shapes. And then I mirrored 2 stencils of the boombox to create other shapes like circles. This is what I call my double circle. This is what I call my black diamond. And this is what I call my square. So all of these shapes are helping me to make my visual language. I'm gonna move around again.
And Glendalys, the visual language that you're using it's really fantastically unique, yet combining all these basic symbols and shapes. I know that you are Aboriginally, you're Taino. The shapes come from an Afro-Caribbean ancestry, and I'm really curious to learn a little bit more about what led you to focusing on this kind of language.
Well, what led me to do the shapes come. Why I'm using geometric abstraction is really, I'm trying to have a conversation between something that's like African American or like hip hop culture, like a boombox, and then like using modernist techniques to kind of break it down, to have this conversation between those two things. And so when I was at EFA, what ended up happening is I was making this print. And I don't know if you can see that because the sun is pretty intense here. I was making this print and I was really interested in my fingerprint. and how do I make a mark? And how do I make that mark more specific to who I am so that when people read it, they know that I am who I am. It can be identifiable. And so this print actually led to me making investigations and research. So this is like my research down there. So I did a whole bunch of research in the study, the Library of Hunter, which is about Puerto Rican studies. And I got invested on like just researching and trying to create, or trying to create these, not create, but replicate these motifs in kind of like a contemporary context. So I'm like using the Taino symbols, and I'm using the boombox, and I'm using modernism. All of those things are representing me at the same time. So I became interested in pattern and symbols after making a couple of pieces in which I was just playing around. You know, I get a little tired of the hard edge. So I started making these pieces just kind of to get myself thinking about how do I attribute a specific pattern to a specific shape so I can create this kind of language that has to do with syntax, so that every time I write a shape, I have to write both shapes at the same time or three shapes at the same time to create a kind of system within the language so it can be readable in this kind of visual way. And that ended up leading me to making my, wow, I gotta do something about the sun. Hold on, I didn't realize it was gonna be this harsh.
It's really serendipitously beautiful. It shows the time, May 22nd, or May 21st, 2020.
Wow.
You're closing the shades. You were mentioning, you know, there's this repetitive pattern we see, but then there's also rhythm. Like once you do one geometric combination, you want to complete that with another, whether inverted or otherwise. And I'm just recognizing maybe this works so well with the concept of hip hop and understanding pentameter and beats and this kind of musical way of presenting this modernist, you know, geometric abstraction, and it really does pull together with the shapes of the boombox being dissected in this way. So it's really wonderful to think about it.
I mean, I always play music when I make work too. Like that's really important to me, just to get in that kind of like mental space of being free a little bit, because my work is so rigid. I try to create movement with these things that you're not used to creating movement with. You know, they're very structural. And so that could be quite difficult at times. When I started making my parents, which, oh, I should flip back. I felt like I wasn't giving anybody my face. They're like, who is this person talking in the ether?
I know we get a speed tour too. There is so much work I want to talk about. It just
I know. I was gonna pull the shade down, but it's too, like the volume would be too much and then I couldn't hear anything. So I started making my parents, and I'm using the Taino symbols. I'm really into New Thought movement. And so what you see around their heads are their halo. What I call their halo is a prayer. And each of my parents have a prayer that relates to their personality. And each of the symbols on their faces relate to who they are too. So I'm gonna talk about three symbols only. This is a symbol that is well known by Puerto Ricans, is the coqui, and it's like an emblem of Puerto Rico. It's endemic to Puerto Rico, and it sings. It has a mating call, which is coqui. The mating call is its own name, and the frog. Well, the males only hear the call, and the females only hear the ki, which I find really interesting because the attraction is sensory. It's not about appearance, and that is a very important thought to me. Like a lot of my performances, you can't see my body. Like I'm trying to control viewership. This is the sun because my mom is really bright. And this is my father's shaman because he's really wise. And this is the prayers that I was talking about. What else can I show you? I'm gonna show you my self-portrait. So all of these three pieces that I just showed you, and this piece, exercise 1, was a part of a solo show I had a participant ink. And my self-portrait is twice the size of my parents'. My parents' self-portrait was actually built on a bed frame that my father scavenged and brought to me because he knew that I was trying to get wood, and he thought it would be a great idea for their portraits to be on a bed frame. Well, I thought that, but he brought it to me. What else can I show you? These are some.
Quick question about you're dissecting some of these symbols, and the symbols, perhaps you have curators or collectors that ask you about the symbols. Do you feel comfortable sharing a lot of the meaning, or are you more reserved or private in relationship to, the myriad of things that are going on in relationship to those symbols?
Well, that's the interesting thing, is that nobody actually knows what the symbols actually mean, because, the Taino Indians were completely eradicated. And so all you have in Puerto Rico are these like carvings on stone and wood, and people can just, all of these are similar. So so this must be this. There's a lot of swaddled children and different drawings of swaddled children. There's a lot of things that look like the sun. So there is no definitive answer. So I can't say, I'm not a scholar on the symbols, and I don't think anyone is, because there's nothing written that says this means this, except for people's interpretation of it. So
it's really
yes.
beautiful, though, in a way. Perhaps it could be intuitive that you're using these as, protectors, or some sort of channeling energy. Sometimes I get a little bit out there in relationship to the thought process of the collective consciousness, but I just am really fascinated by, the selection and how you're working. And do you plot and plan, or is it more spontaneous when you're, dissecting these shapes?
No, my spontaneity comes in restrictive formats. I love restriction because it actually makes me feel more free, as opposed to giving myself everything and trying to determine how do I communicate to my audience. So when I pick the symbols, I try to pick them some of them are specific, like suns look like suns and frogs look like frogs. There's something identifiable about them. But what drew me to the symbols was actually this idea of like, oh, this is graffiti. This is the graffiti of the indigenous people from where I come from. And even, I didn't grow up in Puerto Rico. I'm a Neo Rican, and to use Taino symbols for me is not about, it's more about me being nostalgic for a land that I never had this personal relationship with. It's almost like me being nostalgic for my parents' upbringing, and kind of honoring them too, because there's multiple layers of what a Puerto Rican is. I mean, a Puerto Rican is so many things. And so it's me trying to show, oh, I have this longing for this land where these indigenous people lived. It's also about the shapes being about, oh, I grew up in the Bronx, like 7 minutes away from hip hop, where hip hop was created. And I have siblings who took me to jams, and I was always surrounded by that environment. And then I go to grad school, and they're telling, it's like all this like European art, and modernism is really, what modernism does is it just, especially to Latin American countries, it kind of like eliminates craft and that kind of non-canon vocabulary that happens a lot, and everything else is not Europe. And so when I make my work, I try to include all those things. That's why I use nails and string. That's why I use the hard edge. That's why I use the Taino symbols. I'm trying to show people all the things that I am in one little shape, How can I show everything?
That's so easy.
No, that's difficult. That's difficult. And it's, and how do I pick one thing to, you know, to represent me. So it's not one thing. It's like multiple layers on top of layer on top of layer, because that's who, you know, that's how humans are. That's humanity.
I want to just, can we bring mine real quick? I want to know what were some of the jams that you saw when you were growing up, like any live concerts you saw.
Oh yeah, you know, my sister went to high school with Salt and Pepper. So what? Yeah, my brother used to like was friends with Ken Swift. They're still friends. Who was a really famous breakdancer. So they were always kind of like around. But you know, I was a kid. I was like, let's see, I was born in 1979, and which is the year hip hop was born, you know, depending on who you ask. And my siblings are considerably large. They're older than me. And so, you know, it was just always around, you know, it was always around, and it was always in the street or in the park. And I didn't even know what I was participating in until much later in life, because it was so everyday, you know, it wasn't like what it is now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, what do you
And I
listen
remember,
to in your studio now? I mean, this is like a very banal question. So many, you know, all the online viewing rooms and creative content that's going online right now because of COVID and the galleries are closed. I know it's always like, what's your mixtape? However, I'm curious, what are you listening to when you're making your work? Are you throwing back to, you know, some of these, you know, early
sometimes, but not really.
Are you Bronx bound yet? What's your favorite album right now?
I like Likey Lee 47. Like, I'm like really into her. I just play her on repeat. You
Uh,
know, she like pumps me up. I'm just like, ugh.
mhm.
And I love the performative aspect of her presentation. It's just like she's a masked like rapper. Like she's covering her face, you know? She is covering her face. And it's just, that's a very interesting, you know, I'm into coverage. I'm into coverage all the time. But to be a rapper, to be a female rapper, and you're covering your face is a really interesting thought to me, you know? Because it's like she has some anonymity, like some space, you know? It's like, yeah, you could be in front of the public, but you know, it's like she's, you know, she's maxed. It's just like really interesting. So that's what I'm listening to on repeat mostly.
Very nice. I love to know that. The works that are behind you, we were talking a little bit about right at the beginning of the start of our conversation. And they've got a little plexi on them. I can see that they're larger than a lot of the works that I've seen in person, or you know, of later works maybe. Can you talk a little bit about these? What year did you make those?
Oh, these are old. I was a fellow at the American Academy in Rome, and I was having some serious issues making artwork. I just couldn't do it. And so somebody came to my studio, and you can look them up. They're called Triveni Yoga, and they recommended that I do a silent retreat and give myself some really basic tools. And so for 4 days, I gave myself the stencil I was talking about, that boombox stencil. I'm sorry, I'm gonna try to show it to you right now, even though I gave myself that boombox, but in a larger version, obviously. And I was just drawing. I was just drawing around, and I made this really huge drawing. I made a couple of really huge drawings. And I realized, I was looking at the churches and the mosaics on the floor, which I was really interested in Rome. I would just go to churches all the time. And I was like drawing, and I realized, I'm making letters. I'm making the Roman alphabet. And so these are actually letters to me. This is my H, and this is the A. And there was 5 of them in the series, and it spells shank. So that's how these came about. So this is really like, after the boombox, using the stencil to do the silent retreat, this is where the visual language actually started. That's why I like to like start here. It's like, you know, the boombox, and then I made my stencils, and then I created these drawings. And so that's where this work comes from. And I've made other letters. I mean, I made a series of 26 letters, and I can show that to you. I'm covering them because the sun here is not good for paper. Can you see that? Let's just make sure. So this is one of them. This is a W. So this came like in a flip book that you could, have you ever been to a poster shop and you could just flip through the posters? So that's how this was installed. So they have letters on both sides. Can you see that? That's my X. That's the Y. And behind the Y is obviously the Z. So these are not colored because I consider them my matrix. And I would like them to become a coloring book.
Can you bring it just a little closer to the camera, please, Glendalys? It's a little bit hard to see the detail.
Is that good?
Yeah.
So they all have a, I usually make a sketch of them. This is actually heavier than it looks. That's kind of like what you're talking about, this rhythm and dancing that happens in my work. And I'm trying to, with the drawings, to make them, to draw them in the way they would be written. So they're layer on top of layer in this kind of, I guess, rhythmic way. And the influence for these pieces are just blueprints and graffiti itself, compositionally. Should we talk about something else?
Well, I have a question for you, and it may seem trite and almost a little, hesitant to ask you. Have you gone out tagging? Have you tagged like?
Oh yeah, I used to do that.
Shank? Like, am I going to see it somewhere? Am I going to see it on the Williamsburg Bridge? Am I going to see Bronx? Where am I going to see it?
What I used to do, I used to go out tagging. I used to write the shank, but long time ago, I used to write the shank, and I realized that the shank is too long of a name to be outside and spray painting. So I shortened it to SK, and I'm going to show you this piece because this is how I used to write it. Let me flip. This piece. This is how I used to write my tag, and then I was like, oh man, I felt really bad about defacing like property, so I created black gold, which I don't have. I didn't take out today, and I would wheat paste it, and I had this what I call my video tag diaries, and it was a blog in which I used to post every 2 weeks, where I had posted black gold, and at points I would ask people, where would you want it to be posted, and I would go to those locations and post it for them. I also had a lookout in the video that would we would have prompt conversations about what it's like to be a graffiti artist. Like, it was like 101 educational, how to do this and get away with it. Basically, that was the video blog. So yes, I have been in the street.
You never got busted? Did you ever get caught?
Oh, we came close once. But wheat pasting is not spray paint. Wheat pasting doesn't smell. People use it for advertisement. So it's not and it's also not permanent. It can be easily removed. So one time we were in a train station, and it was New Year's Day, and I decided to post something on the train station, and like the cops were looking at us, but they didn't say anything. They didn't give us a ticket. They was just like, oh, they actually like looked at it and appreciated it. So no, I've never been busted. I've just been appreciated, gratefully.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, but I don't do that. I don't really do that anymore. But you can see a public artwork of mine on 147 in Edgecombe. That's on the bike railing there. But that was commissioned. I didn't do that illegally.
Moving on up.
Yeah, I'm trying to.
You're getting there. Well, I had you've access to your studios is so fantastic in this time where we're asked to be staying inside and only going out if necessary. If you're not an essential worker, we know the drill. what have you been working on, or how have you been kind of, thinking about your work in relationship to the current lockdown?
So when when the lockdown started, I was really, really depressed, and I was having trouble getting out of bed. And I called my mother and I asked her, "Can you please send me your dog so that I can have something to get out of bed for?" And so my mom sent the dog with my brother, and it made me laugh because he had to get out the vehicle and like walk away from the vehicle, and I went into the vehicle to get the dog. But the dog and prompted me to make these drawings that had to do with basically shortening the walk. I had like 7 minutes to walk the dog. I had to walk the dog 3 times a day. And usually I take an hour walk every day. So that was probably why I was sad all the time, because I didn't have my exercise. And I started making these COVID drawings, or these quarantine color studies, which I'm gonna show you right now.
Thank you. So you kind of gave yourself an assignment of sorts, like a parameter of which to work within.
Oh yeah, it was. I do that quite often. I give myself prompts, especially when I'm stuck, because I was so depressed that I was thinking to myself, like, why even make any artwork right now? Like, what does it matter what I make right now? Like, people are dying, people are suffering. I don't even know if anyone's ever gonna see each other again. There's a lot of negative thoughts there, a lot of bleak thoughts there. And so I needed to get myself doing something, because I also had deadlines and I have to keep making my work regardless. So I started making these color studies, and I kept the same composition because I didn't want to worry about, because it wasn't to represent anything but that moment. I'm just trying to represent that moment. So I would go outside, I would have 7 to 15 minutes to walk the dog, and I would find something beautiful, something I could be grateful for, and look at it for as long as possible. And if it was something really, really great, because I didn't make a color study every single time I went out, because I went out 3 times a day, but if it was something that really, really moved me, I would come upstairs and try to put that color down. And it's all by memory. I'm not taking a photo outside. I am just trying to stay in that moment and appreciate that moment, and then come back upstairs and put it down. So that's where these come from. And then
color pencil.
Oh, the medium is color pencil, marker, and oil pastel. So quite a bit of different things. And then when they started imposing the 6 feet, or I started altering the composition. And then when they said, oh, you have to wear a mask out, I started altering it again. So, but I'm back on these, because these, I don't find them to be as, I don't have enough space to put down everything that I see.
So just some bigger paper there.
Yeah, I started making bigger ones, but they're taking too long. I'm like, so this is one of the bigger ones. So this is a really big piece of paper, 24 by 36. And this is, and I take a walk at different times during the day. So some of them are dark because it's nighttime, and some of them are bright because it's the middle of the day. I also started making these drawings. This is what I was talking about, like codifying the language, trying to create a syntax, trying to break down my stencils into shapes so I don't have to use all the stencil to communicate what I'm trying to say. And this is just like me breaking down my stencil into pieces, and this is replicating that breakdown. So I'm saying to myself, the tape decks, they have to be drawn together so people can identify them. The speakers, they have to be drawn together. The dials have to be drawn together. The even bigger speakers have to be drawn together. So I'm like just trying to encapsulate all of that. And so that's my speakers. So I'm using, the pink and the brown are oil pastels. This is marker. This is oil pastel too. And if I get close, you can see that I'm scratching into the oil pastel, and I'm using a comb to scratch it. So I'm using the shapes. I already talked about modernism. I'm using the Taino imagery, which is the the symbols, and then I'm using the comb, which I'm thinking about like the texture of my hair and my African heritage. And I'm trying to, you know, I've said, as if I've said it once, I've said it a billion times. How can I put all of this stuff in one shape? How can I communicate everything I am in one shape, which is quite difficult. But I'm getting closer.
So many symbols, actually, as you know, from referencing Taino to using and creating your own visual language. We've just kind of gotten a tour of your alphabet in relationship to the masks and the comb and other variations that you're seeing every day. But I'm also hearing you reference modernism and certainly hip hop a lot. You mentioned something about the portraits of your parents and yourself. You had said new thoughts. Could you just talk a little bit to that, please?
So when you ask me what music I listen to, I also listen to preachers of the New Thought movement, which is basically telling you that, you know, everything that you think manifests in the world. So you might want to check your thoughts, and that all humanity is interconnected and has a universal force, and that people are generally good and you should treat them with compassion and love. So there's like these basic principles from the New Thought movement. And so I also listen to that. And that's really important to me because my practice is a very spiritual one in which I am trying to transform myself. And in that transformation, create a system in which to give it to other people. So that's why exercise one is like important. I'm always trying to create public programming and performances in which I am giving away what I've learned. And so a lot of how I get myself into the mental states in which I am the most productive, it's like using this material to get me there. And I was raised as a Catholic, but my father is not. He kind of is a Catholic. He's a pretend Catholic for my mother. You know, he really is a santero. So I grew up in a house where my mother is like pro-state and Catholic, and my father is like pro-independence and a santero. And I'm trying to combine those two things because I had a combination of those two things. So yeah, so the ritual in my work and kind of like these prompts in my work really come from me trying to make incantations. Like when I'm repeating things to myself to get myself into a mental state, I'm really just trying to create this kind of ritual in my daily life so that I can control all the states, all my mental states at whatever time, whenever I want, you know? So I'm trying to combine those two things in my practice at the same time. So there's like religion, and then there's ethnicity, and then there's image and identity, and then there's all these like tropes that I've learned, or that I'm like using and massaging to fit my needs, you know? So yeah.
It's really fascinating, that upbringing. You had called your father shaman, and now I can understand a little bit better why. The chaos you're describing in relationship, you're not really describing chaos, but you're saying like it's all over the place. You know, I've got all these things in order to contain it into one, yet I feel perhaps everyone here on this Zoom, virtual studio visit right now, I may agree that the work is so contained and so clean and so clear, cohesive, all the words, C words, and they're really brilliant and beautiful. And as I'm learning more about just the signs and the symbols and your new thoughts, I wonder, like, do you ever make work and never show or hide it as it's like a secret manifestation for somewhere, someone, something?
I used to make work that I never showed, but then that work became work I showed.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think sometimes I don't show like not specific works, but sometimes I don't show how I arrived at something. Like I don't talk about certain things just because it's of a personal nature, or it doesn't add any more meaning to it. So yeah, I have some you know, spontaneous work. But that stuff is like, it's abstract, but it's not hard edge. It's like really playful. I would have these oil pastel drawings that are just like, they're kind of reminiscent of this. It's just like, you know, if I went outside and there was an incident, I remember making these car accident drawings because I saw a car accident in like real time, and I made a couple of those drawings. So yeah, I have work that like nobody sees, but now I'm using oil pastel. So I'm using that material, but I'm not showing that imagery.
Right. Yeah, I suppose it was a little more pointed to making finished work that almost as if the idea of taking an image of someone and their spirit leaving, this idea where the piece of artwork is sacred in itself, and therefore it's so private that you keep it to yourself, like perhaps a finished work. I may be going off a tangent here. The work feels so spiritual and lifelike in relationship to what you're putting into it. And I just wondered if there was something that was finished like that. But yeah, I mean, sure, I don't show everyone when I'm writing. You know, I mean, we certainly
I know what you
know
mean.
what's finished and what's not.
Sometimes I'm really attached to a work, and I just don't sell it. Like, I'm never gonna sell the boombox unless it goes to an institution. Like, there's just certain things that they're so important to me that I'm not sure I feel okay with letting someone else have it or care for it, really. So yeah, there are pieces that I am like, no, that's just not for sale.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so yes, but it's not stuff that I haven't shown to the public. It's usually stuff I have shown to the public. I just don't want to sell it because I'm not sure if I'm okay with that. I like it in my house. You know.
I absolutely understand that. I was speaking to the widow of Gordon Matta Clark recently, and she's fantastic. And Gordon's father was Roberto Matta, who is a surrealist, and basically was describing the sculpture that I was moving around between shows at the gallery, and the sculpture is buzzing. It's like vibrating when I touch it. I mean, it's like bees in a bonnet. I don't know how to explain. It's like seriously, it just has a vibrational energy. And as kooky as it may sound, I was telling her about it recently, and she just kind of smiled and was like, well, Mata says that that's how you can tell when it's authentic. And I've been thinking about that and all the work that's out there right now that's you know, online, and we can't really see it in person. And somehow the exchange between our personal selves in front of an actual artwork does help an artwork have that vibration and that energy. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, I do. Okay, yesterday someone invited me to a panel and asked me a question about my performance. I have this performance that happens in a 6x8 box. And she was like, you know, in this time of quarantine, and my presence in it. So it's a 6x8 foot box. It's six feet long and 6 feet wide. No, actually not 6 feet, just hand to hand. And it's completely dark, and you're giving the prompt that I'm in the room, and no photography or light allowed. Stay close to the door. When you hear the words "thank you," the performance is over. Please exit. And that performance is impossible right now. And the whole performance is about intimacy. It's about being in the room with me while I'm like reciting this love lyric to you. So I'm trying to give you as much love as possible. You don't know what I look like. I don't know what you look like. Our bodies are pretty close to each other. There's parts in the lyric where I ask you for your hand, and some people give it to me and some people don't. So that performance is like, and I've tried to do it on IG. I did it on IG Live, and people enjoyed it, but there's nothing like being in the room with me, you know, for me too. There's nothing like a person being in the room with me. And I try to replicate that, but there is no replicating that, because that's like replicating spirit. You can't replicate that. So yeah, I can't wait till this is over. Because my performances, as much as I don't like to show my body, I still like to be present. I want to be present, and I wanted my audience to be present. And sometimes it's hard to be present and look at a box and feel this. I can't feel my audience right now. I don't know if people are bored. I don't know if people are interested. It's like I'm speaking to a box. And so, yeah, it's like completely devastating in a lot of ways. Because I remember the first time I've seen a couple of artworks in my life that's just like blown me away. And that I saw in the image, but I was interested in the image, but it wasn't until I was in front of it that I felt that sense of awe. And that's really hard to replicate without being there. So, yeah, that's my feelings and thoughts about that. It hurts.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's definitely a stinger, where we're moving to and what's happening right now. I suppose we don't see the horizon or the boat or the ship on the horizon. And so that's a little tricky. Keep thinking about what is ever going to be normal is subjective at this point. And the whole cliche, the only constant is change. It's kind of, but keeping with the manifestations and trying to stay positive and doing the thing. I know exactly what you're feeling in relationship to even hosting these every Thursday, because I am so happy to talk to artists about their work. It's such a love, passion that I have. And to do it in front of folks, it's a little new for me, and kind of going with it. It's fortuitous in a way that this happened this way. However, teaching or speaking to a camera in my comfortable living room and, getting to be in your studio and having voyeurs, and how they do it in teaching at the same time too is really challenging, because so much about being a great educator or mentor has to do with body language and a relational way of body language, and whether someone's listening to you, mocking you. I work a lot with teenagers. Totally, talking behind your back, or even, not getting it, just not understanding. And I'm just wondering, are you teaching right now? You're working in School of Visual Arts, correct? You're a professor there.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, have you taught this last semester, or are you going to be teaching online soon?
I'm going to be teaching in the summer. And yeah, I'm having some concerns about it, because I know how Zoom works. Like, people can chat amongst themselves, and like, you don't know if those people are paying attention to you or not. And if I'm in a classroom, I know who's paying attention to me. I know who's, and it's hard for people to speak up, especially in this setting. It's like, it's hard in person, but it's even harder now. I did a workshop with EFA, and I asked anybody, does anybody have any questions? And dead silence. And I was like, no. As many years
We're
as I've
getting
taught,
to questions in just a couple minutes, by the way, so we'll see what happens.
As much as I've taught in my life, I know that I can be jumbled. I know that I can be all over the place. So I had to push for questions. So yeah, it's gonna be difficult. At the same time, it can be easier schedule-wise, because I don't have to leave to go anywhere. But no, it's gonna have its difficulties with reading the room and seeing if anybody's getting it, and seeing if they're even paying attention. And the technical difficulties can play a factor too. So yeah, I'm like excited and nervous about it too, because I'm a really, I really love to teach. I pack it in. I want to give people as much as possible. I mean, my practice is about giving. So yeah, I want them to leave and feel like they got something from me, and not just,
Absolutely. Well, we're going through the motions of what is an acceptable outcome in relationship to online learning, and the outcomes meaning like the end all be all of what a student actually accomplishes after testing. But yet, what the hell is going to happen with these kids? I mean, the socialization. I mean, we can talk about this forever, and but we don't even know, what how long, where, and how. So let's kind of stray a little from, kind of commiserating about, but there's some positives. Let's say positive. We've got more people waiting. Let me let them in. And it's question time. And I'm wondering, I've been asking questions for the last 45 minutes, and I would love if there is anyone interested in chatting up a question, can answer those. Or if you'd like to see something longer, I know that we've been going kind of quickly through a lot of work.
Yeah, I've been going quick. It's like, it's not easy.
I mean, you have a lot of work to go through, so the more the merrier. And I wondered, I do have a question from Liz Nielsen. Could you get closer to the big portraits of your parents?
Yes, I was just about to, I saw, could you get closer, but I couldn't tell what to what.
That's okay. You said about feeling nostalgia for their lives, and I think this is very interesting. It's an empathetic way of identifying with a past you didn't experience directly.
No.
Yet you have their memories somehow written in your DNA, I guess, if that exists.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I went to study in Puerto Rico when I was a college student for a little while to at La UP, and it wasn't what I expected exactly. Puerto Ricans have a really interesting relationship to one another, especially Puerto Ricans, Neo-Ricans or Puerto Ricans from the mainland in relationship to Puerto Ricans from the island. And so, it was an interesting experience for me. I mean, my mother came and got me because I was so distraught by the experience. I thought I was going home, and when I got there, I realized that, yeah, the Bronx is my home. And so, yeah, I am nostalgic because I don't think that, like, I will never be a Puerto Rican really to Puerto Ricans. I will always be a Neo-Rican because culturally I am. So I am nostalgic for this time for my parents because my parents are so proud that I was born in Puerto Rico. My mother's like, you're not Neo-Rican by definition. And I'm like, yeah, but I am, I really am. So I deal with that relationship all the time. Is this close enough? Am I getting, can you guys see this?
Yeah, it looks great. If you can you do like a side view perhaps, Glendalys? Because
okay,
there's
I'm
like
gonna take
a shadow or something. Just the work looks like it's raised. Are you working with nails there as well? And
yeah, I'm gonna get close. I took it off the tripod. Just give me a few seconds.
Oh, you're good.
Yeah, it's raised. I have it on some paint. Yeah, there's nails and string there. So I'm only doing it on their facial hair really to highlight the fact that the texture of our hair is like we have African descent. And the same thing with the noses. The noses do not follow any kind of value structure that you will be taught in. You mean like this? Is this better?
Yeah, that was great when you were doing some of those side views. I think folks are getting a better idea of the process and materials that you're working. So you're painting, you've got string, you've got nails, and some of the string is bunched up to create thicker or less thick lines. Yes, it's really exquisite with the way the sun is hitting it in the shadows. I have a question we didn't really address, but we touched on. Is there any rhyme or reason to the colors that you use? Deanna asks. And I have
yes. So I use black and gold a lot in my practice, and I have most of my work uses those two colors. And I use black because I want to highlight the African heritage, and I use gold because of what I have for multiple reasons. So I'm talking about capitalism, but I'm also talking about why even colonialism exists. And I'm also talking about how the Taino people were described. So they were described as being sun-kissed. So sometimes I think of the gold as being like the sun. because it like drove colonialism. So yeah, so that comes up a lot in my practice, those two colors combined. And that's why they're in that color scheme.
Gorgeous.
Yeah.
And another question about the portraits, and we'll move on to something else, but do your parents like the portraits? What do they think of the portrait? Luisa Caldwell says.
My mother thinks I made a better portrait of my father. So this is my mother. She has very short hair. And this is my dad. And you know, the reason why I even started making the portraits is because my mother was very, very sick, and I felt like I had to do something to control it, so I can feel like I had some control over things. And so I was like, oh, my father brought me those two planks of wood, and I was just like, oh, they're a bed frame. I should really make portraits of my parents. But I made my father first, oddly enough, just because I thought he was going to be more difficult because he has facial hair. So he also has, so there's also nails on his beard and stuff. I want to pull down the shades, but it's going to make a lot of noise, and I'm not going to be able to hear anything.
That's okay. They're really fantastically lit right now anyway. I know that in bright light, they'll have more, of impact with the contrast. They kind of have a personality right now. There was another question, let me scroll up here, from Marcela Guerrero, and she asks, apologies if you already said this, but where did establishing rules and parameters come from? It's very soloist-like.
Oh.
So I'm wondering if it came from a professor of yours or if you had your own thoughts on it, on the conceptuality of it. Yay. Yeah. La Yuppie.
La Yuppie. Oh yeah. That was an experience. It actually came from the silent retreat. I realized that silent retreat and putting that restriction on myself really allowed me to escape my own mental kind of restraint, my own mental just getting out of my mind a little bit, because I can be an overthinker. I mean, I can be stuck in my mind. I mean, so that really came from that. I found it to be so helpful just to limit myself that way, that I do it. I still do it today. And Matthew Barney's like drawing restraint was actually quite influential to me.
Oh yeah, what was it?
He would strap himself down and like do these athletic leaps to try to draw on the wall. Wow. And I was really interested in that. People always, when I say Matthew Barney, they're like, oh, he couldn't be more opposite than you. But without seeing Matthew Barney at the Guggenheim when I was like 20 something years old, I went to see it twice, and that museum is so expensive. I can't believe I paid for it twice. Because of the system. I was so interested in the system, and now I use the system in my practice, and I use restraint in my practice. So yeah, that show was like super influential to me. I mean, I'm not talking about the subject matter. I'm talking about the process is interesting to me. So it's like, I'm not so interested in his subject matter, but I am interested in his process.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I was talking to a student the other day, and they were talking about how, well, it's kind of lame to say that I'm influenced by Man Ray because I'm making all this work that's like cutting my body up into photographs and blah, 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 body image stuff. Well, actually, Man Ray did do a little bit of trans works, don't let anyone else tell you that that's not relevant when you can make a relation, even if you're not crazy about the work. She's like, but all those females with violins, I just like kind of laughed. But I had another question from Olanronke Akinmowo, and he asks, have you ever felt blocked creatively? If so, do you move through that? I guess that's a great question. How do you move through that?
The prompts. That's how I move through it.
Yeah.
I get, one of my closest friends asked me the other day, is there times where you just don't want to draw? And I'm like, yeah, there's times I don't want to make artwork. There's times, but then I think about, all the jobs I've had in my life and how privileged I am to be able to make artwork. And I think to myself, oh, I have to push through this. But yeah, there's sometimes I use prompts. That's how I get through it. Or I do silent retreats. Sometimes I don't know what I'm doing. Sometimes the world is just bombarding me with so much stuff that I can't even understand why I'm doing the things that I'm doing. So silence really works for me. And I mean complete, I don't mean just like, I mean like unplugging from the internet, being quiet, covering mirrors so that you're not engaging with yourself, and really just trying to get into your own body and your own, and have a schedule while you're doing that silent retreat. So you're like trying to just move through it physically. And you'd be surprised what happens in a silent retreat. You know, because I've done many silent retreats, and usually when I break my silence, when I break my silence by mistake, I'm usually being the most negative, not my best friend. You know, not my best friend. And you become really aware of how much you ask of other people, and you become really aware about what you think, because there's nobody, you know, forcing thoughts into your mind. So yeah, I recommend that.
Absolutely. Those are really good points. The assignments and the parameters are certainly a go-to for creative blockages. I know a lot of artists right now speak to this as they have all this time, or maybe the space in their home, they can, you know, kind of go away and make work. Yet folks are feeling a little, not everyone, but they do feel a little pressure to be like, well, I'm supposed to be making now. What do I do? Even though they're prolific in what they make, and their style and expression is quite unique. Marcela had another question, which I think is a fantastic observation. She asks, Glendalys, your unique abstract vocabulary, is unique. She loves the combination of abstracting the boombox and the Taino symbols, but she was curious about the orientation of the new works. And when she thinks about your work, she sees it vertically, but these new works are horizontal. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I made them horizontal because I've changed, you know, the original stencil, I took some pieces out of the stencil. That's why I made them horizontal. I'm going to show you that now. So so this is my stencil. So when I make the color studies, I took out this and I took out this, and I changed its orientation, mainly because I would go out and I would go out for like 2 or 3 songs. And that composition screamed to me more of a boombox than this does. And so so it was important to me to keep, so this is a bigger one. It was important for me to keep to the composition, to keep the same composition and try to communicate that this is really specific to music. And it was just a color study. That's why I don't want to change the composition too much. So it's not about, because usually my practice is like, she's right, the work is a little different now. Usually my practice is more is more conceptually prompted, but this is really prompted on kind of just like a jump start of trying to think a little bit differently, or trying not to think at all, really. This is like me trying not to think.
Yeah, well, it hardly shows because there's so much wrapped up into all the symbols, as we were saying prior. What someone did ask how long your silent retreats are.
Well, I could go for a long time, but usually 3 days and people start knocking on the door. So 3 to 4 days. Life doesn't allow for like more than a week, really. So 3 to 4 days is pretty good. And, you know, in the quarantine, I wouldn't recommend it, but, you know, out of quarantine. Just because we're already silent. I'm already silent. Like I live in solitude. Like I am a person that's a loner, and the quarantine hasn't changed so much for me, except for the fact that I cannot be social whenever I want. So yeah, I think this is a time to actually engage with other people as much as possible, because everybody's going through their own emotions. It might not be the best time to be silent, but you know, to each his own. I haven't been silent during this time. If anything, I'm more talkative than ever. So yeah, 3 to 4 days I think is a good, and have a schedule, like have a ritual, like that you do every day. You eat at the same time, you take a shower at the same time, you wake up at the same time. It's just like you want to get yourself into a rhythm so that you're not thinking about what am I going to do, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, the stencil that you showed, is that laser cut, a unique laser cut for you?
Yeah, I have, so all my stencils are actually Illustrator files. And I get them laser cut, usually at SVA, but now they're shut down, so different places in New York. I'm gonna need a new one soon because they break like every couple of years.
Well, you're making so much work, and they're just stunning. Liz Nielsen had said that she really likes to pare down newer pieces as well. And you know, we're approaching here 1900, 7 p.m. here EST, and that's the point where we say it's 60 minutes. We did it.
We did it.
I thank you so much for sharing and opening up your studio during this time, sharing such insightful and meaningful ideas behind your work, and having this conversation with me and being open on this Thursday. Gosh, we're really lucky to have you on Artfare, and thank you for uploading a few new of those quarantine pieces.
Yes, there are gonna be more. I was a little, I have so, and sometimes I have a lot on my plate and I'm just trying to do everything little by little.
Yeah, well, you got it, and they're really gorgeous. I know they're 650 each.
Yes.
Right now, which is just, you know, a really nice price range to spend that stimulus. Anyway, right, if you don't need it. It's a great way to support an artist, and all proceeds are going to the artist right now, 100%. So it's a retail value, and artist is putting that in their pocket. So thank you, Artfare, for allowing me. I'm Carolina Wheat to host this, Glendalys Medina tonight. Again, with much respect.
Thank you. Thank you.
you.
I'm very grateful to be on Artfare, and I'm grateful to know the Artfare team. Everybody's been so lovely to me, and I'm grateful to be doing this for you guys. And I want to thank everybody that came.
That is real. Absolutely. Yeah, a total round of applause. You clap in the forest, whatever. Anyway, no cons. Well, thanks again. I'm going to end the meeting, and we're going to record this. If you missed some of it and you want to watch it later, we're going to put it up on the YouTube, usually on Saturday. All right.
Okay.
Ciao.
Ciao. Bye.
Bye.